Hello, welcome to the CreativeStudio 4.1 demo. Gamble has added a lot of useful enhancements to this version that'll save you time. I'm Matt Sherman, author of CreativeStudio. A common problem that a user would run into is starting a long-running CAD process and then thinking that CreativeStudio was locked up when actually it was calculating what they had requested. In the past, we only showed an hourglass to show that CreativeStudio was working, and we have improved that in this version by adding a progress bar to right here. I'm going to do a fill now, and please watch at the bottom as I do this. You see this bar here? Every 50 calculations it draws a line. To go along with the progress bar, we've added a message on the middle of the CAD screen. Calculating. Hold escape to cancel. So when this is up, you know that the CreativeStudio is working. So if you started a CAD process accidentally in the past and it was a long-running one, there was really no way to stop it other than to exit from CreativeStudio. We've changed that with 4.1. Now while it's running, you can press and hold escape. It's important you actually hold escape because in order to keep the calculation process running as fast as possible, we are only occasionally checking to see if you've held the escape key instead of constantly checking. So just hold the escape key, and the next cycle around it'll see that and it'll stop running. In order to increase performance in many areas of CreativeStudio, have reduced the point count that it's required to make a curve. Here I'll show you divide. You can see here on these straight line areas there's less points, less curve points, and then as an arc is tighter there's more. We've sped up virtual stitch out. Here I'm going to press F2 on the keyboard, and you'll see a blue dot moving around the patterns that indicates where the stitcher will go. And in the past you could increase speed 10 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You increase speed by pressing the plus key, which I just pressed 10 times. So this was the max speed in the past. And as you can tell, it would take quite a while to get all the way across this. So now we can increase the speed almost to no limit. Here I've pressed the plus key many times and it's still increasing in speed. I'll press F2 again. As you can see, it can get through this very quickly. It makes the virtual stitch out a much more useful function. As you've probably already noticed, we've increased fill performance up to 70 times faster than it was. It depends, the speed increase depends somewhat on what type of patterns and what type of boundaries you've created, but as you can see here, it's much quicker than it was in 4. In the past, users would be confused about which function was going to be active whenever they press the select button on the keypad, and also which function where the selection would move on the tool strip as I press mode. I'm now pressing the upper right keypad button and I'm moding over. So I'm now pressing the lower right select, and then I'm going to exit. And you can see that the selection went back over here to the far left. We've added a small strip over here that lets you know that you're returning to the beginning and that the next mode press will start from the beginning of the strip. You can see here I started repeat patterns and the selection went over to the far left. That'll let you know that the next mode press will go to the boundary icon. We've improved the stretch handle under Draw, Pattern Anchor, Stretch, or the F12 handles. They're gray, and in the past these edge handles would not track very well as the user moved it. It now tracks very well, and the corners would particularly not track well. It tracks well as long as you're increasing in size, but as you can see, when you decrease in size, it will not track as well. So again, as long as you're increasing in size, you're fine. But if you decrease in size, we advise you to take small movements and just kind of nudge the pattern to where you want it to be. We've improved the snap logic in CreativeStudio. Here I'm pressing E on the keyboard to turn on endpoint snap. I'm going to move this little line pattern here and it'll snap to this other pattern. And here I'm going to zoom in several thousand%, and you can see that even at this tight resolution that the patterns are connected. There was a slight gap in 4.0 which would not affect sewing, but if you were using a pattern and increasing and decreasing the size, it could potentially become a tie-off area if you increase the pattern size enough. And that should be resolved at this point. We've decreased the number of points in an echo, which can be seen by going in and clicking divide, and just like fill, you can see that we've reduced the amount of curve points. This pattern will sew best if sew overlap is turned on. Sew overlap, whenever it finishes sewing, will continue sewing past the start of the pattern and overlap where the tie-off is going to be over the top of the starting stitching. That is turned off by default. In order to turn it on, you'd come in and set this sew overlap value to whatever you wanted your overlap sewing to be. We in the past would require the user to do some math to calculate how long their tie-off length was going to be and to make this value greater than that. Now if the user enters a lower value, I'm entering 50 thousandths, it'll automatically correct the sew overlap value. If you want sew overlap to be off, just change it back to 0. And anytime you change a value on this form, after you enter the value, click into another field to commit it. We've reduced the potential for errors by, when a long-running CAD process is running or CreativeStudio is doing a calculation, not allowing any input from the user so that the user could not start a second function running at the same time. And so here I'm going to do a fill outside. Notice that all the tool strip and menu items are grayed out. Also, I'm not able to right click to get to any of the CAD functions. As soon as CreativeStudio finishes, it then honors your right click request. But until it finishes, it won't allow you to start that. In 4.0, whenever you converted a pattern to a boundary or a trim, the size of the pattern would be increased by about 30 thousandths. This is a pattern that was converted using the 4.0 method, and so you can see that it's increased in size all the way around. If a user was doing a lot of pattern manipulation where they were converting back and forth, that could potentially increase the size to be undesirable. We've changed it so that whenever you convert to a boundary or a trim, the size is no longer increased. Size for size the same. This will greatly improve the convert function, because whether something is a trim or a boundary or a pattern, it doesn't really matter. It can change types without changing attributes of the original work at all. And so this will make it to where it's not so dependent upon the order in which you convert things. You can just focus on your quilting. Also worth noting is that the convert process is now almost instantaneous. Here's a convert to boundary. Here's a convert to a trim. This would have taken, some amount of time, sometimes 10-15 seconds on a complex pattern to convert. The only potential downside of this new convert method is if a pattern has internal geometry like is shown in this heart block. Whenever you convert this to a trim, all the inside parts are left, which can produce some unique effects, like this case where the pattern is shown inside the hearts, but not inside these larger hearts. So the distinction between what is inside and outside whenever you have a line pattern like this is difficult to determine, and so that's what leads to this result. In this case, it may be considered to be desirable. Some patterns it will not be desirable. So the way to deal with this would be to convert your pattern to an outline, which is what CreativeStudio used to do behind the scenes whenever you converted the pattern to a trim. So we'll convert it to an outline, which will increase its size like the way it does in 4.0, and then at that point you can convert it to a trim. So we're putting it in the hands of the user to determine when they want to convert it to just an outline trim, or whenever they want it to not convert it to an outline trim, to either get the effect like was shown here or to not increase size. In 4.0 we introduced the concept of being able to click continue in any quilt group, including ones that are not edge to edge. This worked rather well and was popular, but was limited somewhat in that you could only click the continue button once. The next time you clicked it, it would then place your patterns wrongly. Now we have fixed it so that it can be called as many times as possible as you want. Ask, have you rolled your quilt, and position the needle at the last pattern's endpoint, which I've done here. And then I'm going to click yes, and you can see the patterns moved. So here I'm going to move my head a little bit. You can see the crosshair move, and you can see that the patterns are tracking with the crosshair. Now, regardless of how many times you move it, continue over and over and over again, tweaking, manipulating your patterns. If you forget to roll enough, or if you're trying to stretch your quilt a little more after you've clicked continue, you can just go back and hit continue as many times as you want. Also, in continue, we've removed the check to make sure that you've actually rolled your quilt. Now you can click continue as many times as you want, not actually move your patterns at all, and it will continue to run. In the past, if you hadn't moved at least an inch, it would report back that you had not rolled your quilt and would not allow you to do the continue process. We decided that that was a difficulty on the quilter, and so we have removed that check. In the past, whenever you created a new quilt group, the origin would be placed in the lower left hand corner, and then if you started drawing immediately, you'd be drawing in this area here. Well, since we advise that the origin be set to the upper right hand corner of the quilt stand, then any drawing you were doing in the area that was immediately available when you click new quilt group will be outside the sewable area. This was reviewed by users as not desirable, and so now what we've done is whenever we add a quilt group, wherever the head is positioned is placed as the lower left hand corner. So if you just place your head in the lower left hand corner of the general area that you want to be working in, you can then start freehand drawing, and you know that it'll be drawing in an area that can be sewn. In the past, whenever a user went from an endpoint handled pattern where it has a start and end to a pattern that was a block pattern where the start and end are the same, the pattern handle selection would automatically change to a stretch handle selection. Now it changes to the edge handles. Users reported having difficulty knowing whether the needle was on or off in previous versions of CreativeStudio. So we've added down here on the status bar an indicator that tells you whether the needle is on or off. This directly correlates with the needle on, needle off function that's up in the menu. And so if I remove this check, you can see the word down here goes to needle off. The text color also goes to black. Whenever I come up here and turn the needle on, it will say needle on in a green color. Additionally, if you click on this needle on label, it'll change the status of the needle. So no longer is there a need to go up into the menu item and click on that. You can just click here to change it on and off. Now whenever you close any setup item that you're in, like repeat patterns, edge to edge, by clicking the X on the setup, it'll also close the request for reference point or the button box. And vice versa, if you close the button box, it'll close the setup. We've changed the items on this status strip to size dynamically, so they're only as big as the space that is needed. That's allowed everything to be pushed over to the left more, which will help for lower resolution monitors, and also will allow fields where there's a long amount of text to show the entire text. We've also reduced the X and Y position by 1 decimal, which will make these numbers more useful and easier to follow. We've improved the frequency of the store undos, and also improved the points at which a store undo is done, so that your undo logic is better and improved over the previous versions. With these patterns here, the order of sewing will be 0, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to now combine the middle two, and the order will be 0, 1, 2, and 4 in previous versions of CreativeStudio, the order would have been 0, 1, 2, and so there would have been tie-offs between these continuous patterns. Okay, I've undone that change I just made, and now the order of the combined group is the lowest numbered pattern in that group. So in this case, this was pattern 1. This combined group will become pattern 1. Previously in the CAD, the lower limits of sizing was 1/2 inch, and we've reduced that down to 1/10 of an inch, and which is pretty small. We've also made the lower limits of repeat patterns to match what the CAD limits are. So here I'm going to enter a value that's lower than the CAD limits, and it'll automatically change it to be the same as the lower limit of the CAD. if I would select right here, it would select the trim, the pattern, and the boundary. If I click off into the CAD, it deselects the pattern, but there was no way in the past to deselect the trim or the boundary other than to pick another trim or boundary. Now, whenever you press Escape, the trim and the boundary are deselected. So again, I've clicked here, it selected the pattern, the trim, and the boundary, and then I press Escape and all three items are deselected. In circular array, it was not possible to snap to the endpoint of the pattern you are arraying, and now we've changed it so that whenever you get within a 1/4 inch with the endpoint snap on, it will snap to the endpoint of that pattern. And we are also calling the View All function whenever the array is done so that you can see your array. If you mouse click a set of stack patterns, it will only cycle back and forth between the first two patterns in the stack. In order to get further down in the stack, you will press the greater than key or the less than key to go back to the beginning of the stack. So this worked really well. With boundaries, you can only select 2 deep also. And if you wanted to select these inner 2 boundaries, the only way in the past was to delete the outer boundaries. Well, since we've improved the convert process and boundaries are being used so much more now than they have been in the past, this became an issue. And so what we've done is on your keyboard, right above your greater than key is the letter L. And that has the same function as the greater than key and will move up the order of the boundaries. So here I'm pressing L. The K will go back to the beginning of the order. We had a similar problem with trim, although it was actually a little bit worse because you couldn't cycle select through trims. The way trims have been used in the past, this was not really an issue, but now that they can be reused is becoming more of a problem. And so the next keys up on the next row for your keyboard is the I and the O key. Here I'm pressing O, and now I'm pressing I. In the past, if you pressed the greater than or less than key with only one pattern on the CAD screen, that pattern would not be selected. We've changed that, so now whether you press the greater than or less than, it'll select the only pattern that's available. Same thing for the boundary. I'm pressing the L and the K key, and it's selecting the only available boundary. Now I'll press the I or the O key, and it'll select the only available trim. So it's another method for selecting items that might be hard to get to. Even if there's only one of them on the screen, you can now easily get there and pick them with the keyboard. Okay, I'm in a repeat pattern setup, and in the past you could enter in a negative height to flip the patterns, and we advise users to do this last, but occasionally users would not do this and would change something else after the fact, and it would throw off the setup calculations. So now whenever you change something after you've set the negative height, you'll be reminded negative pattern height must be set last, auto changing height back to positive. It changes back to positive, correctly calculates everything, and then if you want to continue changing some things, you can. But then whenever you're done, you can then go back to your negative height selection to flip your patterns. This is also true in edge to edge. There's a similar message over there. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. We think you're really going to like CreativeStudio 4.1. Happy quilting!